I'm going to introduce Anna and Dave. Anna and Dave are both Beeson alums. They actually overlapped while they were here at Beeson. Anna graduated in 2003, correct? And she is the associate editor at InterVarsity Press Academic, and she was featured in this issue of the Beeson magazine, in case you recognize her face. And then Dave Nelson is a 2004 graduate, and he's a senior acquisitions editor for Baker Academic and Brazos Press. And I just asked them if they wouldn't mind talking to students who are interested in publishing. So I'm very grateful that they said yes to that, because I have spoken to some of you and others who have publishing questions. So I'm just going to turn it over to you all. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is pretty casual, so if you have questions, follow up along the way. You can just raise your hands, and then I think we are just going to give a few remarks and then open it up to questions. I guess I'll just share a little bit about how I got into publishing and then a little bit about kind of what we're looking for. When I was at Beeson, I did not expect to be where I am today. I went into campus ministry after I graduated with InterVarsity, and then transitioned from there into editing an online magazine for women in the academy and professions, also related to InterVarsity. I started teaching writing to entering Gordon Conwell students, theological research and writing, and then doing some freelance editing, and I realized, hey, this is a good way to bring together kind of a love of learning and ministry of writing and the written word, and something that I can do that is probably a better fit for me than some of the other things that I've done. So I started at IVP as a trade editor, publishing general interest books. And at IVP, our editors do acquisitions and development. So the acquisitions piece is kind of recruiting the author, talking through the ideas, considering proposals, and then getting to the point where you're offering a contract. And then development is working with your author to develop that first draft, and working with them on kind of big picture revisions, structural revisions, or content revisions. And then I hand it off to copy editors that do the line by line editing. So then about a year ago, I transitioned into the academic division of IVP. So now I'm doing the same thing, but I'm working on academic books, especially in biblical studies. So Dave and I are not competitors.
Well, glad you feel that way.
Our houses might be, but we don't really acquire the same books.
We all get along with each other.
Yes, that's right.
We both don't like Erdmans. We're united in a common cause.
So I brought a couple of things to hand out, and you can pass. But this is our newest trade catalog. So it will give you some idea of the kind of things that we publish in our general interest categories. We do not do much fiction or children's books, but we do spiritual formation and kind of cultural commentary, ministry resources, Bible studies, things like that in trade. So I brought the trade catalog because I'm thinking if you're interested in publishing now, that you're interested in learning more about trade books, general interest publishing. I could be wrong. So you might be here because you know you're going to go get a PhD and you want to publish academic books, and we can talk about that too. But if you're sitting here now and that's your goal, then you're thinking pretty far ahead, probably. But that's great to have a good game plan. I just want to say one more thing, and then I turn it over to Dave. When you're thinking about what does a publisher want, it's not just a well-written idea. So there are several things that I think publishers are looking for, at least IVP is looking for. One is an idea that's well conceived. So what is your idea, and how well can you articulate that in a short amount of time? What's your elevator pitch for what you want to write about? Where does your passion come from to write about this? and what makes you the right person to write it. We can't give you that idea. We can help you hone your ideas or develop your ideas, but we can't come up with your idea for you. The second thing is good writing. We would love to see polished writing, but that is something that we have people that can help with along the way. So we have copy editors, we have proofreaders, we have people that can help polish the writing, but it's always more fun to read good writing for us and for readers. And then a platform and a market kind of go together. So people don't really like to hear that you need a platform, and I get it, because it sounds like you need to go out and do a bunch of self-promotion, and that might feel icky and salesy and not you. But if you step back and think about if God has given you a message that He's called you to communicate, then that means there are readers that need to hear your message. And so how are you going to connect with readers? If you have this great message, you have a great idea, you write really well, but there's no way to connect it to an audience, then your message still won't be heard or read. And so a platform is just like something, if you think about the word platform, you have people getting up on stage so that their voice is projected, so that you can see them, so that you can hear them better, instead of them just speaking from the pews in the chapel. They go up front. So think of it like that. If you want to develop readers, you want to connect with people that will hear your voice, then there are a lot of different ways that you could do that. So it could be through a position that you have. If you're a pastor, a minister, a nonprofit leader, maybe you have a network through that. You're becoming known as an expert on your topic through that. Or maybe you write other places. You write articles for websites or magazines, and you become known as somebody who writes about this topic or that topic. Or maybe you engage on social media. A lot of people do that when they're younger, before they have the decades of experience in jobs or kind of high leadership positions. If you interact with other people, then you can become known as somebody who cares about certain topics. So what you want to do is figure out, what is that thing that I want to write about first? And then talk about that with other people online, other articles, so that you develop some kind of expertise. So if you want to write a book about leadership, and you don't have a lot of experience writing about that or talking about leadership, and somebody goes to Amazon and types in leadership books, they're probably going to buy a book from an author that they've heard about. And if they haven't heard of you, then they might pass by that to somebody else. So just think of platform and market as kind of trying to connect your message with your readers. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. It doesn't have to be this weird, icky thing where you're worried about too much self-promotion.
Right.
You want to
Sure.
say more?
That was good. Really great, and a lot of great advice there. When Anna started there a moment ago, I was thinking about how so many people in the industry, kind of like us, we never thought we would be doing this. So there's a lot of people in publishing. I get questions, you might get them too, I get questions all the time by people who say, I want to actually go into publishing. How do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I don't really know how I got into publishing. I mean, I know, but it was, just strange circumstances that happened along the way. So I finished up in 2004. When I was here at Beeson, we had a bookstore over in the Sandy Brinson corner. It was an enclosed area. And it was a Cokesbury bookstore, and I managed the bookstore. And prior to that, had worked for family Christian stores for a few years, and they no longer exist. So it's kind of weird that like two institutions from my past, like they don't exist anymore. No more Cokesbury, no more family. Finished up in 2004 and went and did a PhD in Scotland in Christian dogmatics. And when I started in 2004, you could get on the American Academy of Religion website and see lots and lots of job openings in Christian theology. And when I finished in 2011, it took me a long time for a variety of reasons to finish up. We moved overseas a couple of times, and it was a very challenging topic intellectually that Beeson, for better or for worse, didn't prepare me for. It prepared me to do a lot of other things, but not that. And I just want to make sure in case the dean is like, sticks his head around. What'd you say? But yeah, by the time 2011 rolled around, all of the academic jobs had dried up. And there were like 3 openings that year, which I just pause and gut check, because if you are planning to do a PhD, be flexible going in, because it is a different world than it was, just 20 years ago. And there is no guarantee that you will get an academic job. Doesn't mean you don't need to do a PhD. It just means if you're going to do a PhD, you better be pretty darn serious about, this is something I'm called to do and I need to do it. And don't think that it's automatically going to lead to, teaching at a place like Beeson. It just doesn't happen that way. It could, but it's not a guarantee like it used to be. So, ironically enough, and it's interesting that Anna and I are here together, Gerald Bray, my old professor from Beeson, I took a class with Bray every semester here at Beeson, and he sent me a note during the fall 2011 job market thing, when all the jobs were posting, and he said, you ought to apply for this position at IVP Academic. And I remember getting the email. It was a position over the Reformation Commentary series, and I remember getting that email and sitting on it for like a week, going, why on earth would I want to go into publishing? But then I looked at my children, and we had twins who were 6 months old, and I looked at them, and they were crying and hungry. And I thought, well, okay, I guess there's my answer. I better, so it took a week. It took a week of crying children going, we need food, Dad. But then I applied, and then the next day, the position that I have now at Baker Academic opened up. And the interesting thing, the Baker Academic, I brought 2 things to the table. How did I get the job? 2 things. That we had signed up at the time, several items with my doctoral supervisor, who passed away recently, and we never published any of that stuff. But the fact that I had worked with him and knew him and could easily roll into and be his editor, because this John Webster, and this was going to be like the big thing that we were doing in theology. So that was one thing, but then the other thing was Cokesbury, Beeson, 5 years of Family Christian Stores. The fact that I had worked on the, kind of front end on sales, that's how I ended up getting the job. And so what I do, so Anna, it was interesting listening to how you all divide the labor up over there. So I'm an acquisitions editor, but I basically do what you described as acquisitions and development. So the developmental part, we don't actually, think about it as a separate process. The way I always describe it is, if you think of a book, well, I don't have a book in front of me, but if a book goes from the idea in the brain to the book that is in print in front of you, I shepherd, and that's the language I use. It's a lot of, what I learned here at Beeson, pastoral ministry is critical for everything I do. I shepherd or pastor the process from the idea to the submitted manuscript. And then what happens that's a little bit different is it actually gets in the hands of another shepherd at Baker, a project editor, and they're the ones who take the whole manuscript and do all sorts of things, and then they farm it out to the copy editors and do all of that stuff as well. So it's a little bit different. All of the publishers, it's interesting. Fortress, Erdman's, IVP, Baker. We all do a lot of things similarly because we're all doing the same thing, right? But we all do things a little bit differently as well. So that's what I do. I think the biggest insight for me over the course of the last few years was actually after my supervisor died. And I had one of those weird moments where I was thinking a lot about him and what he did for me and the other students while we were together with him in Aberdeen. And I realized it was this weird moment where I was sitting next to a guy and we were talking about, I said, I remember I wrote this thing on Boltmon and John hated it. He scribbled red ink all over the place, and he said, you don't know what you're talking about at one point. And I get a big kick out of it. And the guy next to me says, oh, he would never do that to me. I would get these, he didn't like it, but I would just get these, he wouldn't have any marks on it. I said, really? He said, yeah, because if John marked up my papers, if he took a section and he marked it up, it would destroy me. I was like, that's weird. And as we went around this table, there was a whole group of us, and we realized Webster, every single student he tailor-made the supervisory relationship to get the student to write the dissertation. It's what you're trying to do. You go to do a PhD, and he just wants you to get and that was hugely enlightening for me, because I started realizing, all right, I got in my queue right now, Levering, and Boersma, and Greggs, and Steve Long. I got all these people here. Well, what Matt needs from me, Matt Levering, he needs me to do this, and he needs this kind of feedback. Greggs needs me to read every single word of his manuscript, all the way through beginning to end, and he needs 5 pages worth of comments. He needs to know that I really engaged with it. So a couple other authors I know, Doug Farrow, doesn't want me to touch anything. Just accept it, pass it on to someone else. So it's getting what I end up doing. I'm sure you're learning this, Anna. It's relational more than anything else. Publishing and editing is about developing the relationship and then pastoring an author through. I compare it a lot to midwifery. You're going alongside someone who's giving birth to something, and all of that existential, and Kristen is back there, she's published a book, and she knows it's a process that is very much analogous to that process of giving birth. So real quickly, so Anna, she introduced what she does and then gave her, her insights. When I go out and I speak quite often on publishing, so this is kind of probably more geared towards academic, but I think there's a lot of wisdom here if you want to go into non-academic trade, kind of broad publishing as well. The 3 things I always tell people, I say, know yourself, know your publishers, and know your project. Let me start actually with know your publishers. The best thing you can do now before you write is just to get to know what publishers do. What kind of books do they publish? Publishers tend to think about things in terms of families of books. And when I, as an editor for Baker Academic over our theology list, when I look at a new proposal, the question I'm asking is, does this book fit a family of things that we publish? And if it does, great, we'll take it seriously. If it doesn't, I don't have any reason to look at it. So we don't publish dissertations. We haven't published a doctoral dissertation. I think we maybe published one a few years ago, and it was one of these weird things where we had a famous person who we were trying to get to do something else, and they said, I'll sign the contract if you'll publish 600 copies of my dissertation. And we said, okay, we'll do that. Other than that, we don't do dissertations. So if you do a PhD and your dissertation is awesome, great, good for you. Don't talk to me about publishing it, because I don't publish dissertations. But do talk, if you do this, you talk to T&T Clark. If you do this, you're going to talk to Oxford. Get to know the publishers and what they publish, and that will actually save you a heck of a lot of time when it comes to proposing something, because you'll know who the players are. That's the kind of thing, I never thought about that stuff when I was here at the bookstore. I didn't think about, well, Erdman's has their profile, and they do these kind of books, and T&T Clark does this, and IVP does this. And now that I'm in the industry, I realize, wow, everybody kind of does everything quite different. So if you can do that
So look at your
front.
spines. Look
Look
for the
at the
logos.
spines.
Yeah.
Tell it people all the time. They'll go, I tried to get a dissertation on Balthazar. Who do I publish it with? I don't know. I haven't read anything on Balthazar. I don't know anything about that. But look at the spines, and you'll probably get a good idea of where to go, right? So do that. Know yourself. Know what kind of publishing you want and need to be doing. If you're an academic and you are in an institution that is of a certain type, you might not be allowed, right? This is real. You can't say certain things in print at some places. I'm in great shape. I've somehow managed to find myself in a position where I can write anything I want and nobody cares. I'm not going to do anything weird and jump off, but not everyone has that luxury. Think about what you need to be doing and who your audience is. I would actually suggest that if you've decided that writing is somehow part of your vocation, to go ahead now and map out, it's tentative, but map out a career agenda for writing. Just what kind of books do you want to do? And believe it or not, I can tell you what I'm going to be writing in 10 years and 15 years. Probably, unless I die, or if something comes along and sends me in another direction. But I've mapped it out. I was at dinner the other night with George Sumner, who's here, Bishop Sumner from Dallas, and he wrote on Wolfhart Pannenberg, the great German theologian. He told me this story at dinner, that Pannenberg, when he was a doctoral student, knew the titles of all of the books that he was going to write his whole career, and then he wrote them. He actually did the whole thing, and then when he got done, he just retired to his orchard because he had done everything he intended to do. That's probably a little extreme in German. The Germans are weird. It's kind of strange over there, drinking beer at 8 in the morning. But if you just a tentative idea, an agenda, that's a great thing. And then the final, know your book. Send a great proposal in. You realize someday, probably all of you are going to send a proposal in. And just think about, you're sending a book proposal to editors. Editors are weird people. We're fastidious, we get, kind of jumpy, and when we get words in front of us, things jump out at us, and it just really drives me nuts when I get a poorly written, poorly articulated proposal. I get them all the time.
And there are a bunch of them.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're sending, I say to people, treat it like a job application. If you want to be taken seriously by professional editors, go over that thing with a fine-tooth comb. And what Anna said is really just genius insight here with the elevator speech. That is absolutely critical. The elevator, 150 words. As a rule, if you can't tell me in 150 words what it is you want to write on, I'm not going to publish you. That's as a rule. So there are lots of great ideas that people can't reel in, and if you can't reel it in, that's not good. I keep telling people that the best books in theology are written when the author finds more things to say in fewer words. And the start of that is the elevator speech, when they can sit down and go, I've got 150 words to knock this thing out. And if you can't do that, it's trouble. So that's my 3. That's kind of when I'm out talking to people. That's, to me, those are the golden rules. If you know, it seems fairly Socratic, right? And it's know yourself, know your publishers, know your project. But if you just put a little thought into it ahead, then what you end up with, I talk to so many authors, this is the last thing I'm going to say, so many authors who are just, they're in fits because they've been trying to shop a book around for years. I talked to this publisher and that, and it sits on somebody's inbox for a long time, and then I'll go send it over to them and let them take a look at it. Like, this is a horrible proposal. You don't have an abstract, and then you've got a 5-page rationale that's footnoted, and a bibliography at the end of your proposal? I mean, I don't need that. And I had this guy, it's one of my favorite all-time stories. This guy who was writing an academic book sent in a proposal that had as a comparable title. So we like to see the author think through comparable titles. He put Barack Obama, The Audacity of Hope. And I said, that is just brilliantly ironic. That, yes, it's the audacity of hope that you think your little academic book is going to sell 100,000 copies and you're going to be president one day. You think through, some of these things, and if you do it this is the point, if you do that careful planning and thinking and preparing on the front end, then what you end up with is finding a good relationship up front. And then there's one more thing I'll say, and then I'm done. I'll shut up. But just to reiterate, it is about relationships. Editors are people too. We are weird. And we have strange habits, intellectually and otherwise. But we like to be taken seriously as persons. And if ultimately what you're trying to do with, like if you go do a PhD and you end up teaching somewhere and you go, okay, I'm going to propose a book to Baker Academic. You're asking me to pastor you through the writing process. That's a personal thing, a deeply personal thing. It's always better, I think, if you've got an idea, and this is probably down the road for all of you, I would guess, but if you've got an idea and you want to, approach an academic publisher, it's almost always good to try just connecting with the person first before you send the proposal in, because of that relational aspect. So So there you go. So there's,
And you
Fair
made me, I thought of a couple more things.
what you got?
Sometimes the information about publishing is kind of hard to find. So it's not really easy to Google and find what all do you need for a proposal or what publishers do what things.
Yep.
So some of it is asking around and some of it is kind of just learning through conversations with people. We have a list of what we require for a proposal.
Oh,
that
great.
I
I've got
pass
one
around.
of those too, that if you ever want, I can send it to you.
And
So, yeah.
it's
Probably-
on our
probably similar.
website, but it is hidden.
That's where ours is too. Yeah, it's hidden.
Well, because we don't really want everybody to send us all of their proposals. So you have a leg up coming to something like this because you have a contact. But we do have people who don't have any relationships with anybody at IDP, and they send their proposals or their manuscripts, and they go in a slush pile. And we do look at them eventually, but we're going to look at them much more quickly if we know who you are and have a relationship. So that the one thing that's out of date there is mailing it in with a self-addressed stamped envelope. We don't take those anymore. You can email it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like I was going to say one more thing based on something you said. None of my career has gone any of this mapping out. So, I mean, although it would be ideal to map out all of what you want to do, mine has been pretty circuitous. So don't worry if you don't have something that you can map out. I was going to say one more thing. I can't remember what it was.
Are you editing my answer?
I think I am editing your answer.
There's nothing worse for an editor than having another editor edit it. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's true. I mean, it's good. That's a good word, but I do think you ought to think about what it is you want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, to focus in on, instead of, I either want to write about depression, or I want to write about counseling, or I want to write about preaching, or kids ministry, or whatever it is. See if you can figure out something that's closer and, narrower that you really care about.
And I think that piece of advice that I gave there might actually apply more to direct academic publishing, because when you do get into like if you've done a PhD and you go on, that's when you probably sooner than later ought to think more about. Oh, sorry, am I turning your camera off?
You're all good.
Sorry.
You do what you do. I'll do what I do.
Yes, the tension between the podium and the informal.
It's all
Sorry.
good.
But yeah, in academic, it is pretty, I think, important to at least have some things thought through. But yeah.
Probably true,
But yeah.
yeah. I did think of my last thing I was going
Yeah,
to
what
say.
you got?
Okay, so Dave was saying, he had this friend that pitched his proposal all around. He wasn't getting any bites. And then he found some things. Oh, yeah, well, that's why. So sometimes it's just that you are pitching a book that's the wrong length for your topic. So you're saying, oh, this book is for lay people in the church, and it's 200,000 words. Well, no, so I mean, that's an extreme example, but you have to think about, how does my length and how does my language level match who I say my audience is? So some of that stuff, like how long am I writing? How long are my chapters going to be? Who am I actually speaking to? You're not actually going to be speaking to the layperson, the pastor, the seminary student, the scholar. You have to pick a primary audience, even if lots of different audiences will appreciate your book. You got to speak primarily to kind of one group of people. So that's something that sometimes people don't think through. They have their great idea and they even write well, but it's hard to kind of hone in on the length or the audience or the purpose of the book. So,
Yeah, readership confusion
yeah,
is rampant out there.
yeah,
And it's really like, we'll get proposals in that we don't take seriously. I'll just tell you, this is kind of one of those, 10 things you wish your editor would tell you kind of. There are proposals I get in that I just don't take seriously. And one quick way to determine, kind of the ones to go up to the top of the stack and the rest to leave behind is if something says readership, every Christian.
yes.
Yeah, I get to these all the time. Every Christian, really? That's your readership. You're writing up to every Christian. Really?
Then you're probably not going to.
You're probably not going to get a book contract with that. But honing in and thinking about who the readers are, that's really good advice.
I got one
It's
last
incredibly
week that said this will be the next CT Book Award winner. Not good. You don't really want to say that.
The author had the spiritual gift of prophecy, but that's what that actually is. You don't know that if you.
Oh. All right, questions. What do you? What questions do you have? Yeah.
You mentioned building an audience and kind of like having a platform. I guess it's like one level of it is you said like finding who you want to write it to, but the other level is like, do people know you for that?
Right.
Can the publisher help with that second part, or how much of that platform do you have to have already prepared?
That varies. So if you're not talking academic publishing, you're talking general or trade publishing, platform is actually a pretty big deal because there are more books coming out every year than there ever have been. So there's so many books, and not just self-published, more and more self-published books, but publishers. I'm not going to tell you how many we publish a year because I have a little giveaway. But you want to say how many Baker puts out a year? 200?
Baker Publishing Group or Baker Academic?
The whole thing.
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know. Baker Academic does 70 to 80.
Okay. So you got all these books, and each book is reaching a smaller number of people. Aside from the uber bestsellers, you really have to connect with your specific audience so that your book works. And so you're competing against more books, which is why you need to kind of hone in on who your people are. And so usually you do need to have some connection with an audience. Some publishers have like written rules about you have to have 10,000 followers of some sort, or you have to speak to this many people a year, or something like that. I've heard that. We don't have anything like that. It's kind of a combination of what we see. Is your platform growing, or is it stagnant? If it's small but growing, maybe that's good, So we don't have like set guidelines, and yes, they can help you along the way. Once you have a contract for a book, your publisher is invested in your platform growing. And so the marketing managers will help advertise your book, and the publicity people will help get interviews and things like that. But there's a lot of grunt work that's outside of the writing. Yeah, just from your own marketing, your own willingness to be interviewed, and then things like choosing your cover and your title and your cover copy and forms, all kinds of. That's one of the things I didn't expect about editing was all of my family members who are here in town said, well, you just sit in your office and read manuscripts all day, don't you? And I was like, oh, I can't find time to read my
I haven't
manuscripts.
read anything. Wow, I haven't read in
Because
weeks.
of
I
some
read
of the
emails.
things like cover design and cover copy and things like that you're working through the whole process that I didn't really think about all of the other people that work on making a book happen. Yeah.
I used to call it, people would ask, so what do you do? I used to say I'm a traffic cop. I stand at the gate and information comes in and I just email here, file here, cover copy here, do this, do that. That's all, there's a lot
And
of that.
because we're the liaisons with the authors, so we're kind of protecting the authors from getting all the other people and contacting them. Yeah.
But to your question, the one thing I'll add is great, Anna, thanks for all of that. And I guess just to kind of reiterate and summarize it, I mean, on one hand, when you publish a book, you are going public. So the act of publishing is part of building your platform, right? And because the publisher has invested in you, they want the book to succeed. They're going to do everything they can to make the book work. Now, having said all of that, I think that I get a lot of, maybe I'll tell this anecdotally, I get a lot of proposals that where the author compares herself or himself to James K.A. Smith, to Jamie Smith, because we've published Jamie Smith, and Jamie, you're recording this, but I don't care. I've never cracked a page of a Jamie Smith. I don't know anything about him. Never read him. He's not my author, and I don't understand. But that's because I haven't read anything. But anyway, what I do know about Jamie is a tireless worker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jamie Smith is like I remember talking to someone who's connected with him. It's like he's on the road, like 52. Every week, he's somewhere on the road, speaking somewhere, doing something. Rusty Reno is here, First Things guy. I mean, and he's a publicly well-known person. It's like, how you doing? He's like, I'm just ready to go back home. I've on this 10-day stretch where it's just one thing after another for 10, and he's doing this all the time. I think if you want to be someone who's invested in trade publishing, reaching a wide readership, go ahead and just get it into your head that it is a career, that building the platform becomes who you are. It's a branding, it's like self-branding. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and if you have family with, kids, it can be difficult, for them as well, but that's what it takes.
If you're gonna sell
If you're gonna sell,
lots and lots and lots of
right,
books.
if you're gonna sell lots and lots of books, but most publishers, at least publishers in our area, we wanna sell books. So if I get, I think I counted one year, I think I looked at on average something like 250 proposals in a year or something like that. And if I look at that many, and I'm publishing, so we do 80 at Baker Academic Brazos Press, we're trying to move up to 100. But between 4 acquisitions editors, that means I'm looking personally for 25 books a year. And if I'm looking at 250, that means for every one proposal that I take, and some of them, a lot of those that I take are no-brainers, or they're ones that I've actually gone out and commissioned, that means I'm turning away a lot of stuff. And what we're looking for are the folks who, okay, well, this person has really decided that they want to speak to this and they're just tireless in their efforts.
And I will say that because different publishers have different publishing models, and IVP is part of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. So it's nonprofit, and it has a mission and a doctrinal statement. We publish a narrower category of things than Baker.
Sure. We publish Amish fiction. Do you have any Amish fiction on your
We
list?
have no Amish fiction. Because of that.
What's wrong with you? I mean,
Because of that, we're able to publish books that we're not sure it's a pretty big risk. We don't anticipate that they'll sell very many copies, or the person really doesn't have a big platform, but we believe in the message of the book because it aligns with the values of the whole organization. We want to take a risk to help someone build their platform, to help get their message out. So even though we don't anticipate that it's actually going to make us money, we'll do it anyway, a certain number of those. Now, we can't do that for all of them, or we won't get paid. But so we do that sometimes, depending on who that voice is or who that message is.
and that's very admirable. I work for a family-owned company, and we exist to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a different, as you said a moment ago, it's just a different,
It's a different
model. So in our building, everything runs through a P&L, a profit and loss statement. Each book, when we look at it, most books never see a P&L because we're just looking at proposals. But if we take it on through and we actually enter it into the formal vetting process, we put a P&L together, and if we can't make it work, we're not going to do it. So that's why we don't publish dissertations. That's also, have you ever looked at a dissertation like you're kind of interested in something, you're going, why the heck is this $180? It's a P&L. It's got to be that expensive because they're only going to sell 150 copies, and it's got to be this much in order to make the P&L work. Well, we don't want to do that to our authors, sell their books and irritate them. I think we just published the McClyman thing. The Devil's, what's it called? The Devil's Redemption? I'm asking y'all about my book. I like that. Andrew's like, yeah, that's it. Because you bought it today, right?
Thinking about it.
Oh, you're thinking about it. So there's no pressure. I'm an editor, not a salesperson. So I don't care if you do or not. But that was 90 lists, and that was a big stretch for us. But that was a case where, I don't think I can say this here, where we acquired the book at 1 volume and maybe 400 pages and got 2 volumes at like 1,500. And we actually had to make a decision. Are we going to actually do this or not? When the manuscript came in, of all people, Jerry McDermott, who said he spoke to some folks on McClyman's behalf and said you ought to do it. But that's an exception. Everything else on our list, the most expensive thing I've got up there is $60, and that's the big Evangelical Dictionary of Theology.
Right, that's about as high as ours goes, is 60.
Yeah.
Well.
So so for us, it's thinking about how do we sell at the list prices that we want to sell at, and make the numbers work. And that's where if you get here, I'll just say one more thing real quick. One, this is kind of academic. So if you're not thinking about academic publishing, you don't have to listen to this. But if you are, one of the dying genres is the multi-authored edited collection,
Yes.
because they don't sell. I mean, like one does, like a year sell well, but most of them don't.
And a lot of publishers are saying they're not gonna do any.
We don't, I came down from the top. Dwight Baker came into my office one day and he said, Nelson, if you bring through a multi-authored edited collection and it passes your board, I'm not gonna sign it. I'm not gonna sign off on it. So we're not doing them anymore because they just simply don't sell. Why don't they sell? Because right now, in this day and age, there's too much information that's out there. And people want to buy a book and actually get an idea that's extended across a whole bunch of pages and not a bunch of essays that are of mixed quality, strung together by some, TOC that some schmo put together, right? I mean, they're not good books, right? And so, sorry, that was probably, over the top, but I mean, look, I've done a few of these things. I've edited. I've got 4 multi-author edited collections
we
that
still
I've
do
edited,
them.
and they're all horrible.
Because we are just discerning which are the highest quality multi-contributor volumes.
How are they selling for you?
They're okay. They're
I
breaking
don't
even.
believe it. They're breaking even.
Some of
Maybe
them are okay.
that's
They're not making lots of money. Yeah,
Okay.
they don't make lots of money, and you come to the proposal with strikes against you with that kind of volume. Yeah.
But that's where it's the P&L, right? I mean, that's where with us, we're looking at profit loss, and we're looking at what publishers do. We're thinking about patterns of sales of books, and we're going, okay, well, how will this perform, and how would we make it work without jacking the price up to $75, $80, right? We don't want to do that because that's not the kind of publishing we do. So it's doing the math. There's a lot I don't like math. I got into this because I like words.
Yes.
I was wondering what advice you had for just young aspiring authors in general, especially material that seems worth reading often comes, especially in the sort of pastoral trade with experience and wisdom and maturity. And so, as someone who's kind of excited to try out an idea or something like that, like what advice would you give?
Yeah. Okay.
I would say practice writing.
Practice writing.
So there's so many people that say they want to be writers, but they never write. So all it takes to be a writer is write, right?
Yeah.
So, but an author, you need a publisher, but you don't need a publisher to practice your craft. So you can try it out on a blog. You can guest post on other people's blogs. You could try to write for CT Pastors or other pastoring magazines to kind of test your ideas.
Right.
And if you want to write about pastoral ministry, you might consider, can I co-author something with somebody that's better known in that pastoral ministry realm as a writer to begin with, to kind of get my foot in the door. And now I'm the co-author of this book that's done well, and so maybe I can write on my own after that. Pastoral ministry is the kind of genre that, you've got a lot of very famous writers.
Yeah.
Who've been pastoring for a really long time, and so it can be kind of hard to break into that topic of writing unless you have kind of a really unique angle. I remember we had a book a few years ago called Fail, about a pastor who tried to plant a church and failed, and he wrote about that, which was kind of we had all these people writing about church planting success stories, and that was a different take on something. So maybe you have an idea that isn't something that all these other people are doing, but if it's kind of along the lines of, I'm looking out and I think I know what pastors need to be like based on my point of view, then you might want to get somebody that has kind of more experience on board with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is great. I think just going back to that comment I made earlier about knowing yourself and kind of mapping out, at least getting some idea of what you want to do, but also thinking about that theologically. So, I was talking to someone the other day. This was kind of in more academic publishing, but we were talking about this guy who didn't write anything academic until he was 50. And then now he's written like 8 books over the course of 12 years. And the reason he waited is because he wasn't ready. So he did a lot of practicing. Going back, he wrote in, a lot of review articles and journals and all this other stuff. And then he wrote some things online, but he didn't try his hand at a big statement until he was after 50. I think there's actually something really, there's something really cool about that. But I think if it's the forethought to be a young person who's wanting to write at some point, and in this case, believes very strongly. He's a good friend of mine, this guy is. He believes very strongly that writing is part of his vocation.
Right.
But then he said, well, in order to do that, I'm gonna kind of build up some things. Theology, in this case, proceed, and I think pastoral ministry, pastoral theology as well, it accumulates over time. It's building blocks. You don't, there's nothing really spontaneous about Christian theology or about pastoral theology, about it's wisdom, right? It's part of the wisdom where over time, as you learn and grow and you're in the crucible of the Christian life, you learn about what it means to be a pastor, you learn what it means to do theology. And so the waiting, you truly love weights, right? Waiting to get, to the right point, there's something to that, but then practicing along the way, right?
And also, if you really feel like it's part of your vocation, then I'd be honest with a church or wherever you're working about, this is something I'm called to do. My husband's a pastor. His church didn't really appreciate that and didn't really want him to write, even on his own time. And so if you can be open with whoever is employing you about your vocation is to write, and get to a spot where they appreciate that about you and want to encourage that, that's an important way to practice too.
Yeah.
Bouncing off of that, because I've heard conflicting advice, mostly from different contexts. One was in more, trade writing, the other was more academic. But in terms of writing right now, contributing, like y'all said, would you recommend quantity or quality? Like, turn out as much as you can right now in terms of practicing, you learn the way of the land and get better, or would you say practice, write a draft, wait, sit on it for a month, then come back to it, write another draft, and
Oh, okay.
So basically, in terms of whatever publishing output we are thinking of doing
Yeah,
right now, articles.
I've got an answer.
Go ahead.
Don't publish. I think and I'm saying that, some of that is advice for you as you think of your own publishing career. As others, I think there's a glut, there's too much being published right now. And I think that, I mean, it's interesting, I don't know how to, because I haven't received any proposals from people who tell me in their proposal, I've actually been sitting on this for a long time and waiting until the right, so I don't know how I would react to that, but I actually, just offhand, think I would rather have that than someone who just indiscriminately throws all this, is throwing spaghetti at the wall to try some things out. I just think right now, this is speaking more generally and philosophically, we're in an age right now where it's TMI, there's too much information, too much publishing is going on, and I think there's a danger if you just kind of jump into the fray of kind of getting lost in all of that. So that's kind of my advice. You might have a different
I'm leaning
instinct.
towards something different.
Go for it.
If
I mean, you're wrong, but no, I'm just kidding.
If you want to test out ideas in trade, not in academic
That's,
writing,
maybe that's the difference, right?
then I think it's actually valuable to write publicly if you can get people to respond. Even if it's on your blog where you're saying, I'm just thinking about this, and you're working out ideas. And if you can get people to interact with you and kind of hone your project idea so that by the time you get to a book idea, you've already tested out and you've changed your mind, you've honed it. I think that's worthwhile. I also think it's worthwhile to be edited. So if you decide, I want to write in this area, and you find lots of places that have people willing to edit you, I think that's valuable. So that if you're writing in trade and you've turned in your proposal and you've published in several different publications where people have worked with you on your writing, I think that's valuable. I think it is true that there's a lot out there and there's a lot that's poor quality. And if you publish on all different kinds of topics and all these different publications that somebody looks at your CV and they can't figure out how all this fits together, I don't think that's as valuable. But if you're really focusing in one area and you have kind of common publications with common readerships that you're exploring, I think that's worth doing. And if you're edited, then it will be a little slower because you'll be revising.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I guess, yeah, maybe the difference between academic and trade is pretty
Yeah.
critical there. But I do think it goes back, I mean, so I try not to, toot my own horn here, but it goes back to it's the planning ahead, thinking about it now. So, I mean, that was a good comment there, great comment about when we look at CVs, and we do, like, we'll get a proposal in and we're vetting the proposal and the offer. We look at CVs very carefully, and we do, if there is no method to the madness, if it's just, wow, this person's written on all sorts of things, and just all
And it
over the
looks
place.
a little chaotic, and I mean, this is probably what my CV looks like too. But
Me too.
you kind of wonder what's next. Will they stick with this? Will they finish this
Yeah.
through, or will they move on to something else? So,
Yeah, so thinking ahead is good. Yeah, Mark?
I have a question. And I can think of one in particular, but do you have any models out there of folks who've actually done a good job of moving from academic publishing and also being an effective trade publisher as well, or vice versa? And what do you suggest for that? Like how does one learn and sort of think through the ability to write with a different register, a different audience? Because I hear what you're saying about the clarity of audience. But do you have examples or models? I was thinking Tom Wright, because I do think Tom Wright's one of those guys that can do both. Others out there that you think really good academic, solid thinker, but they know how to transfer that into bona fide trade volume that's written for every Christian. You should, but yeah.
You had to use the
I was
every
joking
Christian.
about it.
Scott McKnight.
yeah.
Who?
Scott McKnight. Jerry McDermott. I mean, he's getting more and more traction in the trade now. What else you got?
I'm trying to think of people we've done. I mean,
Preston Sprinkle, he's a
Yeah.
good buddy of mine.
Yeah.
Who I was at Aberdeen with, and he's written, on Paul and
So what normally happens, I think, is people get their academic experience and they write and they get their academic chops first, and then they try to translate their academic work into more popular
Typically
register. It
that's how it
doesn't
goes.
work as well to try to go in the reverse. And I heard that was because if you start writing popularly, then academics will just look down their nose at you.
That's true.
I mean, I think about Lauren Winter, who's an academic that
Yeah.
mostly writes popular stuff, not as much academic work.
Mhm.
I think it is a hard skill, and I don't think it's one that everybody is suited towards to have this kind of crossover ability. But I think as you teach, as you learn how to teach and speak to different people, then you learn, how to talk about things with more and less technicality. And one of the biggest differences in a trade book and an academic book, at least in our house, is the structure. So if you have an academic book, most of them are building on an argument. They're going in a logical sequence from their starting point to the end with lots of incremental development. But with a trade book, you kind of want to start with your conclusion. Like, okay, here's all of the work that I've done. Now, how can I restructure that into thematic structure, or here are the five things I learned on my research project. Now, can I make those the chapter headings? A lot of personal anecdote that really warms up the prose. And so you can be making a similar argument, but the type of writing is pretty different. So if we get a trade proposal that has big blocks of scripture and builds the argument incrementally, we probably will ask somebody to restructure it. We'll say we want more narrative. We want you to think about changing this up a bit so that your reader who doesn't read that many books a year, who isn't going to sit for that long at a time, is going to have a bite-sized chunk that you can put on. So we stick with 3,000 to 5,000 word chapters for trade. That's pretty short.
That is.
Yeah. So
But that makes sense.
yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I mean, just to piggyback off that. I mean, I think, the reason why it's so challenging to start in the academic world and move toward trade and why it doesn't happen successfully is because, I mean, you wrote with Chris Seitz looking over your shoulder, figuratively, right? And you were writing for a committee, and you wanted to, it was the process of writing the first book is pragmatic. You're trying to pass an exam. And intellectually, the way you write, that your intellectual habits for writing were formed in that crucible, and then you have to unlearn all of that in successive publications, even academic ones. So,
Right.
so Mark Millett is one of my authors. So, I mean, and we've had lots of conversations about writing. Yeah, well, apparently you're not writing anything for me right now. So, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah, I'm editing a book right now. It's in academic, but it's got too many footnotes. And he's like, I just want to show where I got all this, but sometimes you don't need it, depending on the book. I'm not saying steal somebody's stuff, but you don't always need to show every single step where you got there. So I think, I think it takes. I don't think everybody can do it, but we are actually looking for people that want to write these crossover books. And so there are books that are still in the academic line that we think will have much more of a crossover audience. I think that's the way to start instead of going straight popular. I mean, I don't know how much what you love is. I mean, it's a popular book, but I don't know what the audience is.
I never cracked it, remember? So I wouldn't know. But Jerry's book, Israel Matters, is a case where, I mean, it's, how do you describe that book? I mean, it's a book that, I mean, it's not non-academic. It's an intense book, but he's managed to develop a style that is very winsome so that he can speak difficult things in a way that's accessible. And that is, here's Jerry, who of course was in Iowa doing his PhD 25 years ago, and it's the successive steps of getting farther and farther away from the doctoral committee. And someone like McKnight, I mean, I think McKnight, maybe even more than Wright, amazes me. We've got a book on our shelf, I think I sold out of it, on baptism. That's awesome. I mean, it's a little case for infant baptism, and it's just written, it's so breezy, you can read it like a couple of days, but then he just did the Philemon commentary for Erdman's in the Greek New Testament commentary. He's figured out a way to kind of speak in two registers. Mm-hmm. I think with Scott, knowing him just a little bit, I think it's because, again, going back, he thought through all of that stuff. He thought through it. He thought, I want to keep on writing serious academic work and be active in the Guild of New Testament Scholarship over here, and I want to be able to communicate these things to a popular audience, and he determined that's what he was going to do, and through all of the hard work, he's managed to.
Yeah, he's a really hard worker.
Yeah, and all the folks that do it and do it really well. I mean, Tom Wright, isn't Tom Wright because, the funny hat, he is because he works, right? I mean, he works tirelessly to communicate. So,